Hi everyone, and welcome to today's presentation for the East Ohio Women in Agriculture Program Series. Today we have Kim Davis, who is here to talk about insurance. Kim is the owner and principal agent of the Kim Davis Insurance Agency located in Waynesburg, Ohio, which is located on the Stark-Carroll County line. In 2012, she was approached by Nationwide Insurance due to a local agent retirement and was a stay-at-home mom at the time. She was also a state trustee for the Ohio Farm Bureau representing Carroll, Harrison, Jefferson, and Tuscarawas counties, so becoming an insurance agent wasn't something she had ever considered. Fast forward to today, Kim is beginning her 9th year as an insurance agent, and her team sells home, auto, life, and business insurance policies, but their specialty is farm insurance. They insure farms of all sizes in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and pride themselves on the yearly insurance reviews that they do with their customers. Her agency is Elite Farm certified with Nationwide Insurance, which means she has extensive training in farm insurance industry needs and continues to meet the goals set forward by Nationwide in growing her farm book of business. Last July, her agency transitioned to independent status, and they now offer multiple insurance company options. Her daughter, Katie, is the newest member of the agency. Kim is a graduate of The Ohio State University and resides with her husband, Todd, who is the director of the Ohio FFA Camp Muskingum located in Carroll County. They have 3 grown children and have a herd of beef cattle on their Carroll County farm. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Kim.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I presented several years ago at the conference, and I'm disappointed we can't do it in person, but was excited to get the invitation from Extension to share a little bit about insurance today. So thank you for joining. I know sometimes insurance is one of those yucky topics, but hopefully you learned something today, and we'll try to make it fun and entertaining at the same time. So our first slide, what's that? Oh, so I was going to ask a question, but I see a lot of us have our camera off, but you could use maybe a response at the bottom. And Katie's over here to my right. You can't see her, but she's like my IT gal today. So we thought we'd ask a question to get started. So I'm curious, of all of you watching today, how many enjoy receiving that insurance bill in the mail? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Like, I used to be like this. I'm like this. Oh, good. Oh, I like this. A lot of these. Wonderful. So, okay, thank you. So hopefully when we're done here, you might be kind of like this, and then eventually you'll be like, you know what? I really appreciate getting my insurance bill because here's what I know what I'm covered for. So, okay, let's get started here. So, yep. All righty. So we're good over here. Yep. It's on a monitor, so I'm looking 2 different places.
Looks good.
You got it? Hold on a second. We'll probably have to do it over here. There we go. All right. Hopefully today, at the end of our presentation, you will have 3 takeaways. These are very important things that when I started back in 2012, I knew nothing about insurance. Literally, I was a stay-at-home mom one day. In fact, when Nationwide called me, I remember I was fixing lasagna. I had our youngest, Allison, by the stove, and I was like, who is this? Nationwide? I'm like, oh, hi. And they're like, hey, your agent's retiring. We think you'd be a good agent. And I was like, oh, thanks, but no thanks, and hung up the phone. So when my husband got home, I said, I just got the weirdest call from Nationwide. They think, you know, that Roger's retiring, I'd be a good agent. He says, Kim, you need to call him back. And I told Todd, you need to call him back. So make a long story short, I was a stay-at-home mom one day, and then back into the business world and owning your own business the next. And it didn't take me long to realize that an insurance policy really is part of your overall risk management plan. So when you're budgeting, you know, if you're a livestock farmer and you're budgeting for feed and stuff like that, I mean, insurance needs to be part of that. And it protects the things that matter most to you, the things that you've worked hard for. And there's several different parts of that insurance policy, but it really is part of your overall risk management plan. The second thing I realized within a couple months of being an agent is people didn't understand their policy. They thought just because they paid a premium that they were covered for all of this stuff. So I was thrown into a couple yucky claim situations, and I thought, this is not going to happen again. We're going to try to talk to our people so they understand what their insurance policy covers. And we're going to do this, yearly with them. And we're going to make these outbound calls and just kind of educate people on their insurance policy. And by doing that, you realize what you're covered for and what you're not covered for. And you can also control the premium at times based on, reviewing that and kind of, deciding, well, do I really need to cover this building? Do I need to cover this? Maybe moving equipment out on a busy county road keeps you awake at night during harvest. So if, that's something you can call your agent about and say, listen, do I have enough insurance? What's that look like if I get more? Do I need less? And the last thing I learned really quickly is your insurance is only as good as your agent. So there are people that specialize in home insurance, auto. Our gig here is kind of farm insurance. We ride a lot of farms, and so we see a lot of farming operations, and we always get unique questions and things that people are wanting to do and start up. So there are some insurance companies that will shy away from insuring a farm, but we've got Nationwide and Ohio Mutual as the top 2 farm writers, and they love farm policies. So we'll kind of get into a little more of what is covered, but I like this little slide here. It said, I really want to be an insurance agent when I grow up. Said no one ever, but yet here I am. So Katie and I enjoyed finding some of these. They're pretty funny. All right. So for the most part, we're going to talk about a farm policy, okay? Because we're women in agriculture. A home policy is similar, but much simpler. So farm policies are pretty complex. So if you have an agribusiness insurance policy, there are several things that are covered. The first one is the property. So the property piece covers your stuff, okay? It could cover your home, its contents, your equipment, farm buildings, four-wheelers, your side-by-sides, your livestock, grain bins. It just covers the stuff that's above the ground. Most insurance companies are not going to insure anything below the ground, but any structures above the ground that you want covered or any stuff you want covered, you should let your insurance agent know about. If you have, we got a call in here the other day, we have someone that's going to start doing some ultrasound on horses. And so they had bought an ultrasound machine for like $8,000. So she called in, she goes, hey, I need coverage on that. So that's an example of things that can be covered. So what's the stuff that you want covered? And then that stuff is covered for replacement cost or actual cash value. So this is really important on buildings. Replacement cost means in the event of a claim, you're going to pay your deductible, and your insurance company will take care of the rest by replacing with brand new stuff. Actual cash value is used a lot on older buildings like older bank barns, because while they served a great purpose back in their day, they're not very equipment friendly. Sometimes these old bank barns, to calve out a bunch of cows, they're not very easy to work around. So for instance, our bank barn is not covered for replacement cost, it's covered for actual cash value. So if our barn would burn down, that the amount of insurance I have on it is going to put up a pole barn or something else. And that amount that I've picked, I know will get me started or build me a nice facility. I'm not going to replace it with that bank barn with all the nice sandstones and all of that. And then you might see the word perils on your policy. So this is what your buildings are covered for in the event of a loss. So fire, lightning, wind, hail, theft, vandalism, the bursting of pipes, a tree falls on your house, a tree falls on the barn, things like that. So there's a whole list of perils. And if you guys have questions, we can take those. And Erica, you can interrupt me if you get one in a timely manner, and we can stop and address that. But most homes and buildings are covered for almost anything that could happen to them, or at least that's how we cover them. So we go through that with people, the what ifs, when we review. And some people say, I was thinking, I parked my new EB livestock trailer out there in the yard underneath that maple tree. Is it covered if the tree would fall on it or a branch? So those are kind of the things, when we review that people ask that we can, talk about and where that's covered. And yep, this is how it would work if that would happen. So that's the property. This that covers your stuff. Okay, so that's the property piece of your farm policy. The second piece, I often say, is the most important piece. So this is the liability part. And hopefully we get some good questions here today on liability. If you guys are thinking of doing, some extracurricular activities on the farm. So the liability protects you personally. Should someone get hurt on your property due to your negligence, it also will pay out if you are sued and you're not negligent, it will pay out for attorney fees. So we had an incident here this last summer. We had a farmer in Medina County who does not do any of his own spraying. He has it custom applied. So he got a certified letter from a neighbor saying, hey, I'm going to sue you because the people that you hired to spray, they must have sprayed and because they've killed my trees and my yard, and I think I've got some dead fish in my pond. So our insured called us and said, Kim, I just got this letter. I said, no worries, get me the letter, we'll file a claim. And Nationwide got an attorney to defend our landowner from that case. So a lot of people think, well, what's the chances of me having a liability claim? We hear about them, but it not only pays out when someone's hurt and they sue you because of your negligence. So let's say you're moving a piece of equipment on the road and it's not properly lit, or it was properly lit when you left the house, but after plowing all day and coming back, maybe there was a light out or something. So that's what liability covers, okay? So covers you if you're negligent and will defend you if you're not. It also comes with some medical payments. So if you've got anybody helping you on the farm or helping a spouse on the farm, not anybody on ordinary payroll, but like I've got kids. So if Garrett's working on the tractor and his buddy Zeb comes over and says, well, I'll help you fix that tire, and he gets his hand smashed, all insurance policies come with medical payments. And it's typically around $5,000, no deductible, but that pays out the first $5,000 of a person's medical bills should they get hurt on your farm, regardless who's at fault. So that's good to know if anybody's thinking agritourism or things like that. And we'll get into that in just a second. So liability also can be an issue if you have employees. So that's a whole nother monster. If anybody has any questions on that, if you've got employees that are on the payroll, typically if they get hurt, that's a workers' compensation issue. Remember, liability is for your farm presence for people that get hurt that are not on the payroll in general. There are some instances where that's not necessarily the case, but that's why I put employees and put a question mark. And the other thing that I'm finding as I go out and review with folks, whether they have us as their insurance agent or someone else, it used to be back in the day that your liability included pollution coverage. So pollution meaning spray drift or a fuel oil spill or a chemical spill, whether you're going, maybe you're hauling mixed chemical down the road and for some reason the valve pops loose, or maybe, you're in the big sprayer and a hose ruptures. So any type of those pollution issues. How about this? Hauling manure. Maybe you've got some liquid manure and you slop some out on the road. So back in the day, your liability coverages used to include pollution. Well, it's just, I kind of think where we are in the world. Now, most insurance companies do not include pollution under their base liability. You have to add that. So I wanted you to be, and we'll talk about that in a second, but so of the two farm companies that we represent, Nationwide endorses pollution. So it's kind of nice. If you're just worried about manure, you click that box. If you're worried about spray drift and fuel oil spills, you click that box. Ohio Mutual over here, they do include pollution under their liability, which is rare, and it's actually got some advantages. So just be, if you're a crop farmer, livestock farmer, and you're worried about pollution, make sure you call and ask your agent, where exactly is my pollution covered? Because when I first started, there were a lot of people that thought their pollution, especially with the Nationwide policy, was automatically included, and it was not. So that's pretty important stuff. Okay.
Hey, Kim.
Yep.
We have a question. What about snowmobilers who could get hurt on your property when they are trespassing?
Yeah, good question. I think I just saw an article I think it was was it the Buckeye Farm News? I think it was with Farm Bureau. So great question. So you are a property owner. You notice that someone is snowmobiling on your property without permission and they hit a pothole and flip their snowmobile or they hit a tree. Are you negligent? So the first thing you would do, someone's injured on your property, you are calling your insurance company right away just to give them a heads up. Okay, say, listen, this person got hurt, because what happens, again, you're paying for an insurance policy that provides liability coverage. So it's going to pay out if you're negligent. And if you're not negligent, your insurance company is going to do the work so this incident goes away. So for the most part, and it always depends on how creative the attorney is, I will say that loosely. For the most part, when you would file that claim, the adjuster would ask you questions like, did you have no trespassing signs up? Was there a marked gate, visibly marked, whether it's, a fence with some warning signs like do not enter private property? All of those things help you. At the end of the day, if this went to court, an attorney would have to say that you were negligent in some way when that person got on your property. So we've not had one of those. We get a lot of those questions in the winter. We insure farms all over Ohio. So especially in Ashtabula County, people will call and they are madder than a hornet because they see people cutting across the corner of their property when there's a snow. So those are anytime, think of the things you can do to mitigate any type of risk. So let's say that you did have some no trespassing signs up and this person was injured and it went to court. Your insurance company would say, listen, first of all, this person was on property that they don't own. Visibly, there were, no trespassing signs out. So all of that stuff will help you. So we've never had a claim yet. We get a lot of different ones, but that is a good question. So again, if you were negligent in some way, that would be a liability claim that your insurance policy would pay out on or would try to fight. Insurance companies, a lot of people think insurance companies look for a way to not pay something. That is not the case. But an insurance company is not going to pay out on a liability claim unless they know that you were negligent. Okay, so it's kind of a vague answer and it kind of depends on the situation, but anything you can do to, lessen the chances of that happening are better. Now, if you knew, let's say there was an old oil well path and that's how they were entering off of a main road and you saw them yesterday and you're like, they're snowmobiling on my property. So you thought you'd go out and string one strand of high tensile wire and, or maybe your spouse or maybe one of the kids thought, I'm going to teach them a lesson. Now, if they hit it, then you probably are negligent because they've already been on it once. And I know this sounds crazy, but you went out there and strung a piece of wire hoping to clothesline them or, just show them who's boss, and there was an accident. So if you saw them yesterday and you went out and you put some fence up, just make sure that is clearly marked and clearly visible, like do not enter, yellow flags or whatever. So it's kind of a crazy world we live in, but we do get that question a lot. Okay. Autos. You can put any autos on a farm policy for the most part. It could be the minivan that you drive to school. It could be the Cadillac or the new Trailblazer that you just bought. We can put pickups on a farm policy, any trailers. I will tell you, most people will say to me, well, my current policy, I have trailers, but they're covered by the truck that's pulling it. Well, for the most part, on a farm policy, we will list trailers on an auto policy because when they're loaded up with hay bales or the skid steer or livestock, they're heavy and they're going to do some damage if there's a wreck. So liability on a trailer is really, really economical. It might be $10 or $15 a year, but I always list a trailer on a farm policy. That's saying that it's covered by the power unit that pulls it is for utility trailers. Let's say you go to TSC and you buy one of those $1,200 trailers that you can put your lawnmower on. That trailer wouldn't necessarily have to be listed for liability, but these bigger trailers, we always list on a farm policy for that. And then if you've got semis or semi-trailers, those go on farm policies. And the great thing about those, with a couple of the farm carriers that we have, if you buy a semi that you're just using to haul grain, you can put layup credits on that. So a layup credit basically slashes the premium based on the number of months that you use the vehicle. It stays on the policy year round, but your premium is just slashed based on your use. So we had a fella yesterday that called Katie and said, hey, I bought a semi. It's going to be a grain truck. And we know that he's going to use that 3 or 4 months. So, instead of that semi being $600, $700, $800 a year, sometimes those semis can be $300 or $400. And usually the bigger the truck, the less expensive the rate. So sometimes we can put a semi on a farm policy, less expensive than we can an F-250. So that's what's so cool about a farm policy. Farmers are usually pretty careful. If you think of a farmer compared to like just a regular person over here on the left on a personal lines policy, if a farmer backs into a telephone pole, they'll probably shake their head and kick the tire, but will they necessarily turn in a claim to fix the truck? Probably not. The person over here on personal lines, if they get a little scratch in their vehicle, they tend to call in and use their insurance policy sometimes as more of a maintenance type policy. So farm policies are cool in that they're rated for this unique group of individuals that work hard, have a lot of assets, usually are very careful or very mindful, and they're smart business people. So that's why, all of these things work together nicely on a farm policy. You can also, most people, in fact, probably all of the people that we insure here on a farm policy have an umbrella. So an umbrella provides the extra liability protection should your base liability limits not be enough. So again, a lot of times when I review with people, and again, this could be someone that pays $3,500 a year for a farm policy, or this could be someone that pays $35,000 a year for the farm policy. They like to insure their house, that makes sense, and all their buildings and all their tractors and their equipment, and they're really proud of that. And at the end of the day, it's the liability part of that, where if you don't have the right coverage, can take all of that away. So I always tell people, and that's why all of our people have an umbrella, because we have had a couple of these happen where there has been an at-fault accident, either in a vehicle or with some equipment on the road, where someone else has been injured and their base policy had $1 million, and that wasn't enough coverage based on, who was hurt and what was damaged in the event of the accident. So when you reach your base liability limits and that's not enough, your umbrella hovers over top. And umbrellas are basically rated or based on the number of vehicles you drive, because usually that's how it's going to happen. Liability claims are mostly on the auto side, not so much the farm side. And usually they range, you can do, most of ours, I would say on an average, are probably 1 to 2 million, but we have a lot of people that maybe have 3 to 5 million. I don't have anybody that has 10 million, but everybody does have an umbrella. So on our farm policy, when our kids started driving, I put an umbrella on our farm policy. And the umbrella, basically you're thinking, well, how much coverage do I really need on my umbrella? Well, it's based on your assets. So again, on your base policy, and everybody that has a farm policy with us has $1 million of liability on the base. And then they tell me what else they want. So they know their investments, they know what their house is valued at, they know what they've got in their equipment, and they don't want to lose that. So they know they have $1 million here, and they'll have me add whatever else I need to for the umbrella. And umbrellas, really, for what they provide, are really pretty inexpensive. But you just have to keep in mind, and there are some people that have a lot of assets. I'm thinking of one right off the top of my head here, and they just have $1 million in umbrella insurance, because they're like, Kim, you can be insurance poor. I think the chances of, this awful incident happening are small enough. I'm really, going to take a risk here. And I think $1 million would be enough for me. So that's a conversation you can have with your insurance agent. I think everybody needs $1 million. Most people probably need more than $1 million. Okay. All right. Then this is hopefully where we get some good questions. Then on your farm policy, you can add some endorsements to cover unique things that you might do on your farm. So let's say that you've got a nice farming operation and you do some corn and soybeans, but you've decided for a little extra income in the fall that you're going to sell some mums, and you're going to have a little roadside stand. out at the end of your drive. So that is something your insurance agent needs to know, because remember, your farm liability is for basic farm liability. Meaning, if me as a cattle farmer, my base farm liability would cover, let's say Katie has a friend out and they walk out in the field to look at the newborn calf and the cow gets them down, chases them, gets them down, and her friend is injured. That would be a liability claim on my policy, because that's part of my natural farming exposure. Let's say I'm a crop farmer and, I'm moving equipment on the road. I cause an accident because I pull out in front of someone. That's your base farm liability. But any of that extra stuff that you do that brings in extra farm income that's happening on your farm, you probably should let your insurance agent know about that. So if you were a Nationwide customer or an Ohio Mutual customer, and you called me and said, hey, Kim, I'm thinking about growing some mums, and I'm going to be like, oh, great. And you'll say, I'm just going to sell them here at the farm, and I'm going to sell like 2,000 of them. And I have no idea what I'm going to make. If you told me that, we would add a roadside stand endorsement to your farm policy, because now your exposure has elevated a little bit. Now you've got people pulling into your farm off of a main road that could cause an accident, and your insurance company wants a little bit more premium for that exposure. If you called and said, hey, I'm going to grow some mums, but I'm not selling them on the farm, I'm going to take them to a couple fall festivals and some farmers markets, we put a farmers market endorsement on your policy. And those endorsements, if I were to add that to your policy, there would be a question, what are the gross receipts? And that kind of determines how much you're charged for those. And they're really pretty inexpensive. But again, if you don't call your agent, here back to just because you pay an insurance premium doesn't mean you're covered for everything that can happen. If you would not tell your insurance agent and you called in, you could risk that claim, if there is a claim, being denied because you don't have the proper endorsements on your policy. So I've listed some here. Raw milk sales, believe it or not, raw milk is excluded from your farm policy, but can be added back on as an endorsement. Farm pollution. If you're Nationwide, we're going to talk to you about farm pollution. You're going to tell me I'm not worried about it, or this is what keeps me up at night. We can add those. Care, custody, and control. If you're feeding livestock, if you've got chicken barns that you're feeding for case, or if you're custom feeding beef cattle for other people, anything like that, remember your farm policy covers your stuff, but not necessarily other people's stuff. So that's something that your agent would need to know. Equine activities. Years ago, insurance companies were kind of nervous when you mentioned equine. They've gotten a lot better. So we insure a couple really nice horse farms that do some training and boarding. We insure a really nice one. She actually trains high dollar barrel racing horses. So we've got a boarding endorsement on there that would cover, should there be any negligence on her end that would result in the injury or the death of the critter on the farm. So again, that's a nice little endorsement. This next one, this off-premise liability, is a big one. So your four-wheeler or your side-by-side is not part of your farm equipment. It has a title, it's got a steering wheel or handlebars, so it's covered like maybe a motorcycle. Think of a motorcycle. It needs its own separate coverage. So most farm policies understand that you use those on the farm, and they can be added right to your farm policy. However, if you put that thing on a trailer and take it to Bowling Green in August, it's now off premise, okay? And if you don't call your agent and let them know you're taking it there, and you would cause an accident, you would hit somebody's vehicle, or you'd pull out in front of somebody and they wrecked and they'd come after you, you'd have no coverage. So this is another one I'm always telling people, off-premise liability. When they go off-premise, they're going off-premise for recreation. They can go off-premise from farm to farm. It's when they're joyriding, lots of kids on it, it's being taken away to a non-farm activity and being used. Your insurance company needs to know about that. We have a lady in Morgan County, once a week, she goes to the Morgan County Fair, and she, with her golf cart, and I think maybe they're side by side. She loves to help elderly people, and she'll go out in the parking lot and pick them up and, take them to wherever they need to go. So we have a contact in our system, like 2 days before the Morgan County Fair, we called Joyce and say, Joyce, are you taking your golf? Oh yeah, thanks for calling. So we put off premise on that for a week, okay, because she's putting it on a trailer, taking it to a public place, and she's not charging people, but she's just, giving people rides out of the kindness of her heart. So we put off premise on that for a week. Okay. So very important on that. And then peak season is kind of a cool coverage. So peak season can be coverage for grain, commodities. We've got a nice apple orchard up near Chardon that we insure. So for farms that have, that are producing something, like say apples. So if we're going to insure apples while they're in a store, a farm market, or if they're in the cooler at the farm, we probably have a lot more apples in the fall than we do June the 1st. So we can actually add coverage. We just need to know what months and the dollar amount of that commodity you want a little extra coverage for, and we can really kind of fine tune your policy. And so instead of you paying for that, that October rush of apples year round, you're just going to pay for it for a couple months, and we can kind of work with that, and that saves you quite a bit on your policy too. Okay, so this is an important part too. So this person here talking, it's like putting bubble wrap around all your worries. So Katie thought that was funny, but that guy, he's a character, I'm sure. But anyways, a general liability is something we can add also to a farm policy. So we're talking about a lot of liability here, so hopefully it's not getting too confusing. So a GL is different, again, than your typical farm liability. So a GL is something that can be added to your farm policy when you've got another farm business that is generating income with receipts of about $10,000 or higher. So an example would be, we have a farm insured up north, and they are large Pioneer seed dealers. So they have one big farm policy, and one of the parts to their big farm policy is the GL for their Pioneer seed sales. They mix seed, they distribute seed, they deliver it. People come to the farm. It's a very nice business for them. We can add that right to their farm policy. Another one would be, we've got a nice farm and they do farm fencing. They don't do, like public fencing, like for swimming pools or residential, I guess is what I'm looking for, but they do just farm fencing. So guess what? They have this nice farm policy with a GL on it for their business for farm fencing. So it just kind of makes it nice. You don't have to have two policies, and it's just kind of all in one. But again, it has to be farm related. So if you said, hey, we live on a farm, but I am like one of the best barbers in the state of Ohio, and I have a barber shop, that's not going to be a GL that's going to go on your farm. But any type of farm related sales, it could be meat sales too. Let's say people come to your place and pick up meat, and your gross receipts are typically $10,000 or more. That's usually a good time to add a GL to your farm policy, because you're storing that in your freezer until they come and pick it up. And again, the exposure has just increased. And because of your gross receipts, your insurance company is like, oh, we probably should put a GL on this so we're covered a little better. Okay. I put some other, we've got a guy that does a lot of custom spraying. We talked to a gal here not too long ago who's making these amazing goat milk soaps, and she's selling them. I found this interesting. When I called underwriting about that, they're like, we will put that as a GL on the farm policy, but on their website, they cannot make any like guarantees. Like they can't say, my soap takes care of your eczema, or my soap will take care of all of your acne needs, So you just have to watch. If you're thinking about doing something like this, always call your agent and ask them first. Say, listen, is this something I can do? There's always a place to get it covered for the most part. Sometimes we can't just cover it on the farm policy. So this goat milk soap, it seems like a lot of people are really trying these, and they're trying them for the health benefits. And nationwide, it's like, we're fine with that, but we just don't want any claims, health claims, or we don't want her adding any medicines or anything like that to the soap. So they're pretty much all natural. If she decided to add that medicine and make those claims with the soap sales, then we'd have to probably put that on a kind of over here to the left on a commercial policy. It would not probably be covered on the farm policy. Okay. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah,
So
we do have-
remember, yep.
Kim, we do have a couple. One going back to liability. Any suggestion on how to strike up that conversation with your neighbor, along with the addition of signs like knock knock, howdy
Yeah.
neighbor, quit crossing onto my property because you're bored. I see you and I don't like
Yep.
it.
Great. Yep.
Then what do they do?
Yeah, so great question. So documentation is always a good thing because that's going to help you too. So hopefully, and I know not, we've got wonderful neighbors. Our dog just ran away, or somebody picked him up last week. Oh my gosh, I had 2 neighbors on there side by sides riding all over trying to find my dog. So hopefully you have good neighbors, but it's certainly, you know, hey, I'm your neighbor. You know, I noticed you had your snowmobile. I'd really prefer you not do that. In fact, you know, we have our no trespassing signs. We don't want you getting hurt. And you know what? A lot of times people don't understand if that's, you know, if that's a cover crop or alfalfa under that snow, I mean, they don't realize they're damaging the crop that's underneath there. So yeah, have that conversation, you know, document that kind of stuff. All those things go a long way, you know, to helping should there be an issue. And I'm sure, I'm thinking of a fellow in Ashtabula County that we have insured, like, you know, he yells at him, then he calls the cops, and you know, I mean, hopefully it doesn't get to that. It happens, unfortunately, and people think, you know, I guess their excuse is, well, the snow was on the ground. I didn't know where your property started. So to me, they're negligent at that point. But I'm telling you, it just depends who gets a hold of these cases and what happens. So I'll give you an example of one of the largest liability claims that we've had here at the office. So we had a farmer that he's got a buddy that's helped him plant beans for the last 30 years, lives in town, but he plants and helps this large farmer plant his beans, just his beans, every year. So he was down on this little podunky township road along a river that no one really travels. And if they do, it runs along the river. It's pretty flat. I mean, you can see for miles ahead. So the friend of the farmer had finished planting beans in the field, but couldn't just go to the next field because there's a big ditch. So he pulled out onto the road, got straight away, and noticed this S10 just barreling down the road. And he thought, oh my gosh, he's not slowing down. He's going to hit me. So he got the tractor with the duals and the Kinsey planter over as far as he could. He said, Kim, I grabbed the steering wheel because I knew he was going to hit me. He said, I thought I'd just fly through the front of the tractor cab and I'd be dead on the spot. So the guy in the S10 hit the Kinsey planter, went underneath it, a piece of metal come through the windshield of the S10, missed the guy driving, the elderly guy driving, hit the seat, put the seat back of the extended cab. So here's this guy in his S10 under the planter with his arms waving. So this friend of the farmer jumps out, cuts his seatbelt, calls 911. They get him out from under the Kinsey planter. He's life flighted and he survives. This was in May, several years ago. So our farmer calls, he wasn't even at the farm. He was at another location. And just because we know how we have people insured, he's like, Kim, is this going to be covered? I'm like, absolutely. As long as you give someone permission to drive your equipment, there's coverage, no questions asked. So the guy driving the vehicle, his insurance company, the guy admitted it was his fault. The guy in the S10 admitted it was his fault. He had had 3 accidents within that year. One of them was a drunk driving incident. So his insurance company fixed our farmer's planter and everything. Again, this is in May. The day after Thanksgiving, the same year, we're on our way to a cattle show. Our farmer calls, he says, Kim, I just got a certified letter in the mail. I'm being sued for that incident where that guy hit my Kinsey planter. And I said, no worries. I said, we're going to call this in and Nationwide will take care of it. Now, this farmer it ended up going to court. He did have to, he had some time in going to court, but Nationwide did end up paying out on this claim because the guy operating the tractor. And if you saw where this happened, he was literally coming out of one field, he'd get straightened up so he could turn to go in the other. It couldn't have been more than 60 feet if I had to guess. But when he pulled out onto the road, he did not have the Kinsey planner in transport mode. So when this went to court, Nationwide, and here's the thing, that guy's insurance company had already taken care of our farmer's planner and everything, but word travels fast. There was probably an ambulance chaser. They put this stuff in the paper. Somebody got a hold of it and said, listen, this is a farm incident. Typically they have assets. We might be able to get you something out of this. Let's try to sue this guy. And in the process, they discovered that he did not have it in transport mode. So we paid out a little over $800,000 in some medical bills and some attorney fees and that kind of stuff. So while our farmer was very appreciative of that, he was also upset about that too, because, you know, at what point are you negligent? Like no one in their right mind would have put that Kinsey planner in transport mode because nobody ever travels this road. And if they do, I mean, who would just run into the, you know, I mean, there was just so much wrong with this, but it was, and I'm not an attorney and I have friends that are great attorneys, but it was just the situation of this attorney saying, listen, that Kinsey planner, can't you fold those up? And they're like, well, yeah. And they're like, was it in transport mode when you were on the road? And when they said no, so, you know, the insurance company Nationwide at that point was like, well, we'll settle. So it's kind of, I don't know, sometimes, and I'm just being real honest, it's this vicious circle of, most people don't sue because they want to, although in this case they did. Most people will sue you because they have to. Maybe they're injured on your farm. Maybe they come out and there was maybe you have a friend and she come out and she goes, oh my gosh, I've never rode a horse. Can I get on your horse? And maybe your horse just bucked for some reason and bucked your friend into the fence. And she had a shoulder surgery and she had to have two of them. And then she couldn't work. And yet they were doing an addition on their house. And so she didn't have the income. So, you know, she had to sue you in order to get those monies because she was injured and she couldn't pay her bills. And, you know, who was negligent at that point? So that's where it gets kind of tricky. Back to the snowmobiling. I mean, anything you can do to lower the chances. So my gosh, if you have documentation that you talked to your neighbor once or twice, that you sent them a letter, you know, that you made the local officials aware that there were some trespassing issues, all of that stuff goes a long way in protecting you in the event of a lawsuit.
We have another question about the raw milk. I'm curious about the raw milk sales. That would apply to states other than Ohio, correct? And there's a continuing conversation about whether or not it's legal to sell raw milk.
Right. Yep. So Nationwide's a nationwide company. So that is correct. So yes. Here's, if you are, I mean, I know people that are selling raw milk through their cow shares. We don't insure them. If we did, like that person, if I did insure them and we were doing a yearly farm review, I would say, listen, you know, I noticed I found a website where I can buy a share of your cow. You know, should there be a liability suit on here? There's no raw, you know, raw milk is excluded from this policy. Like there will be no coverage. And that's a whole, gosh, when I was a state trustee for Farm Bureau, we went round and round with policy on raw milk because my gosh, my father-in-law grew up on it, right? Lots of people grew up on it. So that's one of those, yes. Insurance laws, an insurance policy contract can vary state to state based on the laws of things like selling raw milk, growing marijuana. I mean, there are marijuana farmers out there, there are hemp farmers out there. So it just depends on your state if there's coverage from your policy or not. Good question.
Okay, we have another one. What about hosting a wedding or family gathering? And then she also asked about elementary classes that might be coming to tour the farm.
So great questions. All these are really good ones. Okay, so let's do the wedding one. So typically, things that you have for your family members on your property, if they are not paying a fee to attend, are part of your farm liability. However, having said that, and being in like the business we're in, and we see things that happen that typically you wouldn't think would happen. If one of my children were getting married on our farm, I would call my insurance agent and I would get a 1-day event policy. They're super cheap. They're like $250 and they provide just liability for the event. It's separate from your farm policy. So I would do that just to be extra cautious. Trust me, there are a bunch of weddings going around on farms that I don't know about that there's not coverage for and nothing's happened yet. So that's kind of a gray area. When our kids graduated from high school, we had graduation parties and there was like 200 people there. I didn't call and get an event policy because I knew who was coming. And I mean, it was in our yard. What's the chances of something happening? You know, the electric fence was on. That kind of worried me if a little kid went over and decided to put their tongue on it or something, but nobody was getting in the fence. I mean, our dogs are really nice dogs. I wasn't worried about it, but as long as you know the people and you're comfortable, you just have to, again, I mean, an event policy, like I said, it's $250. To me, that's money well spent. You know, but you know, those add up. So if, you know, if it's keeping you up at night, you can get that. If you're not so much worried about it, you want to take your chances, you can. So I will tell you, most farm policies, I mean, I would think if you did not have an event policy, the only thing you have to watch is alcohol. So you should probably get the event policy on that one. We've not had that claim yet. And again, I know people are having events. I'll give you an example. I insure our neighbor and he's a crop insurance guru. And here in March, he invites all of his crop insurance people to his shop and he has a big meal and he has speakers and he has like a little trade show. So I have asked underwriting before, they're not paying a fee to come there and he does not get an event policy and he would be covered if someone got hurt there. But the chances, you know, they're sitting down, listening to speakers and having a dinner. So there's not a lot of risk there. Weddings can get, I know when our son Garrett graduated, I'll never forget, somebody come in and one of his friends had gone to the bank barn and climbed up the big beams and was walking across. Do you remember that? Brenda Johnson. It was, yeah. And I'm like, I went out there, I'm like, what are you doing? Get off of there. So that's the kind of stuff that can happen. But again, an event policy would be a good idea, but it's not necessary. If you're having a farm tour of kids, like think of the risk of this. If you're having the 3rd and 4th grade classes from your local elementary come out to the farm in the fall to pet the animals and, you know, pick pumpkins or something, that is something your insurance company needs to know about. And again, there's an endorsement they can add on for that. Or if your underwriter's not, or your agent's not comfortable with that, they can do a 1-day event policy. Insurance companies, some of them may get a little nervous about like young children. And I don't know where they break that line. Like if the school called me and said, can we bring all of our kindergartners to your farm? Trust me, I'd get an event policy for $250. If they were 7th or 8th graders, you know, in the class with my kids or the high school FFA class, I wouldn't be worried about that. So the important point, I guess, whenever this stuff is happening, call your agent. Some people were like, well, I don't want to call my agent. You're just going to charge me more for that. I was like, okay, well, at least you know that. Whereas if you go ahead and do it and something happens, let's say you're already paying $10,000 a year for your insurance premium, you're going to be madder than a hornet that wasn't covered. So you have to communicate with your agent.
We have another question about how do I list equipment, maybe a 6-foot bush hog that is worth under $1,000 or other items that naturally that I would never make a claim on unless a big disaster happens, such as a fire or the barn collapsed. How do I list those miscellaneous items in instances like that?
These are some wonderful questions. I'm looking at Katie, I'm like, yes. So equipment is covered 2 ways on a farm policy. It's either scheduled or specifically listed out, or you can group your equipment under a blanket list. So most of the time with our farm insurance carriers, if you call with a piece of equipment that's 5 years old or newer, we're going to schedule it out over here. We're going to list it out if it's a combine or a new tractor, because most of the time, almost all of the time, when you list them out like that, it's less expensive and you get replacement costs for the first 5 years. So if you buy a tractor that's 2 years old or a skid steer, this has happened before, somebody goes and buys a new skid steer and the booger catches on fire the next year, you're going to pay your deductible and it's replacement cost. So you go get a brand new skid steer out of the deal. But then you've got all this other stuff. You've got these older tractors. You've got this batwing brush hog. You've got a semen tank. You've got miscellaneous tools in your shop. All of that stuff goes on a blanket list. And what you do is you list that stuff over there that you're concerned about. And you put today's value to the right of it. We usually don't need serial numbers or anything on a blanket list. You're going to say, I've got a 4020 tractor. I'm going to say it's worth $10,000 if I sold it today. Out in the shop, I've got probably $20,000 worth of tools. You're going to put that over there. You're going to put your brush hog at 1,000. You're going to put an old plow at 800. You're going to put all this stuff on here. You're going to put a value and add it up. Let's say that total is $100,000. You're going to have, in the event of a loss, whether it's one piece or all those pieces on the blanket, you're going to have $100,000 worth of coverage. So most of our farm policies have a combination of listed stuff and blanket stuff. We do have some people that have nothing but blanket stuff, and that's all fine and dandy. But you have to be careful on a blanket list if that's the only equipment coverage you have, especially if all of your equipment is stored in one building for the winter months. You have to make sure that list of equipment is going to take care of everything in there. Because if you had a list that you gave your insurance company, that let's say you gave them a list of blanket equipment for even $50,000, let's say, okay, because it doesn't take long to get there. So you have a policy, it's got $50,000 worth of blanket coverage on it. Everything's in this outbuilding and there's a barn fire. So you file the claim, you make a list of everything that was in this building at the time of the fire. Well, when you make up your list and give it to your agent and your adjuster, the list of equipment that was actually in the barn, instead of it being 50,000 that you have on the policy, it's 100,000. So what happens, you would think your insurance company, because you're paying for 50,000, you think they'd pay you 50,000, right? Because you're paying premium on that. Actually, this is called co-insurance, which we have never been a part of. This is why we review every year, because I never want to be in a co-insurance penalty situation in a claim. If you're only insuring 50,000, but your loss was 100, you were 50% of what you should be. Your insurance company is giving you 50% of what you had listed on your policy, because you were kind of avoiding some insurance premium there. So that might have been a little more information than what you need, but older equipment, older pieces, a lot of smaller pieces are better suited on a blanket list. The insurance rate for that is a little higher per thousand evaluation, because what's nice about a blanket list, you can buy and sell through the year and not really tell me, but because you're paying insurance premium on that 100,000, you always have that coverage. Where if you list out a new tractor, and let's say you called me a month ago and you added a tractor that was 2 years old and you tried it for a week and you didn't like it, and you traded it in on another one and you think you called me, but you didn't, when something happens to that tractor, if it's listed, it has to be listed on there with the serial number for there to be coverage. So we always keep we keep on top of equipment lists too. So your question about the smaller stuff, you would have, it's called unscheduled farm personal property, or a blanket list of stuff you would want covered. And you would have to be the one in the event of a loss that would have to, and it's not like your insurance company is going to say, well, prove to me that you had that. You're going to be honest and make a list of stuff that was stolen or vandalized or whatever that is.
So Kim, what's the most frequent question that you get about insurance?
Okay, so a lot of times people will call and say, hey, if I file this claim, is my insurance premium going to go up? So you may be surprised to know that on a farm policy with a financially sound, stable insurance company like a Nationwide or a High Mutual, and I'm telling those two because that's who we mostly work with, your farm policy is in this pool of insurance coverage with all these other farms in Ohio and Iowa and California and Texas and wherever. Now, if you're a High Mutual, you're just a pool of farmers in Ohio. So depending on the financial wherewithal of that company, I will tell you, our son totaled a truck several years ago. our auto rates did not go up one bit. We have had shop fires, we've had house fires. The fellow that had the $800,000 liability claim, do you think his premium went up? It did not. So that's the nice thing, again, about a farm policy. Most farm policies and farm business with an insurance company is very profitable for the insurance company itself. So that's why they're not having to like surcharge you. If you have a personal lines policy, you know, with an auto, you know, maybe your minivan or your Honda CRVs over here on a personal lines policy. Now those, most all insurance companies on a personal lines policy, you have a speed or an accident, it's just a reason for them to increase your rates. But on a farm policy, that's not the case because it's just this, they're just a different cast of characters. So sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with smaller mutual companies that you might be insured with, if that's a Mennonite Mutual or a Wayne Mutual, there's nothing wrong with those companies. However, they're smaller and they sometimes can't withstand, like if a big storm come through, they can't withstand that loss. So they may surcharge your rates. But your larger nationally known insurance companies, especially a nationwide one is a good example, you are not surcharged for that.
Any last questions for Kim? Well, I do want to thank everyone for joining us here this afternoon.